back again with Ninja Kitty to do my really overdue New Worlds November wrap-up video. If you are unaware of New Worlds November, it is a reading event created by the Bookish Bryants. I'll have their channel linked down in my description, where we spent a month reading short science fiction, so 250 pages or less. So week one was terrestrial, and for terrestrial week, I chose to start off with The Essential Hal Clement Volume 2, which I chose because November was also the kickoff for another reading event called Hal for the Holidays, which I created to get some more people to pick up Hal Clement, who is my favorite science fiction author. He's been largely forgotten and he's largely out of print. And by overlapping it with New Worlds November, it would give people an excuse to pick him up. So I read two short stories from this book. The first one was Proof, which is about beings made of energy and live in the sun who encounter matter, which does not exist in their world. It is a myth. And the matter that they encounter is Earth, first the atmosphere of Earth and then the surface of the planet, and the consequences of that encounter. The description of the science in that story just blew my mind. I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite stories by him now. The other one I read was Impediment, which is about an insect-like race of aliens who land on Earth and are having trouble getting off the planet Earth and need some help. And this was essentially an exploration of how two species who do not communicate in the same way, and as a matter of fact, do not even conceptualize things in the same way, how they might be successful in communicating. And I really enjoyed that story. I did have a little bit of a nitpick about the ending, which I'll go into perhaps in a different video, but overall it was fantastic. Highly recommend both of those stories. The next story I read for week one was The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang in this collection called The Stories of Our Lives. And there is a lot to unpack in this story. I'll have to do a video dedicated to only that story because there was just so much. Look at all the stickies I have just in that story. It's like 50 pages. I have like 12 or 13 sticky notes on that, or notes, I should say, on this. It was kind of two stories in one, kind of. Half of it I absolutely loved. I loved everything that had to do with the aliens and the way that the linguist in the story is learning the language and how it affects her. Everything about that, fabulous, just loved it. And the other part of the story was her essentially talking to her daughter in flashbacks. Did not like that part of the story. I could have done without that entire part. But boy, there was a lot in this. And I do not often find myself having to look up the definitions of words. But wow, I had to look up. I'm not even sure how many. It was at least 3, but it might have been 5. So yeah, there was a lot to unpack on this. I'll try to make a video about just that story so I can really get all my thoughts out properly about that. So week 2, November was an extremely busy month for me. I had 2 really big life changes happen during the month of November. So week 2 pretty much got skipped. I don't know that I read anything during week 2, but I certainly didn't read anything specifically for the extraterrestrial theme of that week. So we're going to skip on to week 3, which was classic science fiction published before 1965. So for that, I read 2 collections of short stories by H.G. Wells. The first one is called The Empire of the Ants and Other Stories, and it has this really horrible cover that I don't like. My favorite one out of this book, well, I had 2 favorites out of this book, but one of them is in this other collection, so I'll talk about that one in a minute. The one that appears only in this one that I really liked is called The Magic Shop. It is about a man and his little boy who go into this magic shop, and the door only opens for certain types of little boys. And apparently this little boy is one of those types because the door opens for him. And a lot of bizarre things happen while they're in this magic shop when the boy's trying to pick out the gifts he would like. I don't want to tell you anything else about it in case you would like to find this a story on your own. I'm sure you can find that free somewhere. So the other H.G. Wells collection is also called Empire of the Ants and 8 science fiction stories. But this one was published a little bit later, and it is actually a movie tie-in to a movie called Empire of the Ants that was made in, I think it was the 70s, I do believe. But this cover, love this cover. It's so great. Don't you love this cover? I just absolutely love it. So it also has movies, it has pictures from the film inside this book. Let me show you here. Joan Collins starred in this movie. Here's a young Joan Collins being attacked by a giant killer ant. I saw this movie when I was in elementary school. I don't remember it very well, but I do remember these giant ants coming over this hill. Here's another one with a giant ant carrying a man away. Fabulous, fabulous book. So my favorite story out of this book was called, what was this story called? It was actually also in that book as well. The Man Who Could Work Miracles, fabulous. I loved that one even more than I loved The Magic Shop. So it is about this man who is suddenly finds himself with what is essentially the powers of God. He can literally do anything, anything at all, even things that don't exist, even create things that don't exist, and also including changing the will and thought process of a human. And he goes through this whole story having all sorts of anxiety about having this power. It's just a short story, and anything else would probably be spoilers. But I do highly suggest that if you don't go after any other H.G. Wells, that you go after The Man Who Could... Wait, what was it called? I keep forgetting the title of this story. The Man Who Could Work Miracles. That was it. Again, I'm sure you can find it free somewhere. Yeah, definitely read that. It is so, so good. It was a 5-star read for me. You know what? I lied to you. I did actually read a story. Now, I read it during the week 4 for robots and AI, but it counts as extraterrestrial, so I'm going to count it. And that is called... Forgot what it's called. Oh, gosh. I never prepare. Okay, let's see. It is called, it's called Swinilda's Song. And it appears in this book called Medea, Harlan's World, which was edited by Harlan Ellison. It is a world that he created and worked on with a handful of other science fiction writers of his day. And they all wrote a story based in this world. This is a fabulous book, by the way. The entire beginning of this, all the way up to, where is it? This entire beginning of the book right here is all about the world. It talks about the lore of the world, the creatures, how it works, the science, all that stuff. All that up to that first blue tab there. All of that is about the world itself. And then all of the rest of it, as you can see, are the short stories. So Swinilda's Song is about this woman who is essentially a failed singer. She spent her life doing small singing parts on stage. She wasn't any good, and now she's starting to age. She's had plastic surgery. Her agent gets her this opportunity to be a person who studies the songs of this floating, see this little floating alien on here? Their language is essentially song, and they want somebody, a professional, to go there and study the songs and see if they can figure out this song language. So she goes to this planet, and everything goes horribly wrong, and they end up being prisoners of some of these aliens that have been genetically crossbred with humans. It was a lot of fun, and the character of Swinilda is hilarious. Has a really sarcastic sense of humor. She says a lot of little smarty pants, makes a lot of smarty pants jokes and things like that. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was such a fun story. So I'm going to count that one as my extraterrestrial read, even though I read it during AI and Robots Week. So speaking of AI and Robots Week, I read 2 short stories for that week. One of them was also in Medea here, and it was a Hal Clement, which also goes for my How for the Holidays, called Seasoning. And it was about this man who has an artificial intelligence wristwatch crystal, for lack of a better description. It's a type of black crystal that, like in a prism shape, that attaches to his wrist like a wristwatch. There's a handful of them that humans have found, and they're sort of scattered throughout the universe. Nobody knows who made them. Nobody knows exactly how old they are, but the implication is they are several hundreds of thousands of years old, and they are conscious and self-aware and all of that. They just lack emotions, really. This man is looking for some survivors of a crash ship or something to that effect on this planet. And this planet is really very inhospitable for humans. So it's a very difficult trek he's making. And he's relying a lot on this AI, this little AI wristwatch prism thing. It was kind of an adventure, and it was a very interesting exploration of a possible outcome for an artificial intelligence. Let me just put it that way. So the next story I read for week 4, AI and Robots, was from Isaac Asimov's Foundation's Friends. I read another Hal Clement story out of here called Blot. It takes place on an ice world, and the humans have their own robot, and they encounter an artificial intelligence that is almost a mirror image of their artificial intelligent robot. And they have this sort of conflict with the two robots sort of have this conflict going. And it's all due to a misunderstanding in how different species conceptualize the world. So it was exciting and it was good, but the whole reason I love Hal Clement and the whole reason to read him is how science heavy they are. They are the hardest science fiction that there is. But this story was lacking. It was a little lacking. The most science we got out of this really was how the gravity worked on this ice planet on which they are based. And that's all the more science we got in this one. So I was a little disappointed. It wasn't my favorite. So that is all of the short stories that I read for New Worlds November, and I will see you guys tomorrow for my How for the Holidays wrap-up video.